A lot of people are picking Texas A&M, and rightfully so. They are a talented team, but I don't think people know enough about these Penn State Nittany Lions, and we're going to cross it over to find out just how good Texas A&M actually is.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, the official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/Locked On to get started. That is FanDuel.com/Locked On.
And welcome in, everybody, to a Locked On crossover edition. Chris Gordy here of Locked On SEC, joined by Zach Sako of Locked On Nittany Lions, as we're looking ahead to some of the tournament games happening this week, and one in particular, one that a lot of people are going, saying this is going to be a really close one. People picking both sides of it. It is the Texas A&M Aggies of the SEC taking on the Penn State Nittany Lions, and nobody better to have talking about the Nittany Lions than Zach. And of course, I've been able to see A&M in person a couple times this year and have kept up with them, and sets up to be a very intriguing matchup Thursday night, late night game if you're on the Eastern time zone or Central time zone. But Zach, welcome in. Excited to break this down with you, man.
Yeah, appreciate it. It'll be a good game. I know Penn State at least is the underdog in Vegas's eyes, but I think this, I believe it or not, is actually a pretty decent matchup for the Nittany Lions, just because Texas A&M plays a little similarly, at least from what I've seen, to a lot of the Big Ten teams that Penn State plays in conference all season.
Yeah, the interesting thing that both these teams have in common is, they made some nice postseason runs here in their conference tournaments. And of course, the A&M getting to the championship game for the second straight year. Last year, they get there, lose to Tennessee. This year, they get there, lose to top-seeded Alabama. For Penn State, I don't know how many people had them predicted to run through the Big Ten tournament like they did. Of course, ran into a good Purdue team and came out just 2 points shy. But give me your thoughts on what you saw from Penn State this past week in conference tournament play.
Yeah, I'd say it's quite the roller coaster, at least from Penn State's perspective, because there's the ongoing meme. It's like, we're, after a win, we're back. And then after a bad loss, well, we were never there to begin with. Oh, we're so back. Never mind. We were never anywhere close to being a tournament team. Oh, we're way back. We're a tournament team. We never had it. We never stood a chance. So it really was this roller coaster of a season for Penn State, especially when they had about a 4-game losing streak in the middle of February. They kind of limped their way through December and January, really, and just didn't. They finished where people had them projected in the Big Ten, which was 10th. But the conversation was, okay, is this a team that can get into the NCAA tournament? Because that's what everyone cares about. And I had episodes when they were on their losing streak. I sold out and said, like, hey, this is not an NCAA tournament team. And in the moment, they weren't playing like it. But then they bounced back. They turned it around completely. They won 4 out of their final 5 regular season games, picking up honestly more surprising wins against teams that I thought they were going to lose to down the stretch. They ended up beating the teams that they were supposed to. And then they had some questionable losses like they did against Rutgers, where they were leading by almost 20 points. But they ended up getting those wins against Northwestern and Maryland, both 2 teams that were fringe top 25. But they ended up getting the win and then going on the run in the Big Ten tournament the way they did to beat Illinois, to beat Northwestern, both 2 of which were pro Illinois and Northwestern crowd, since this tournament was in Illinois, in Chicago, and then taking it down to the wire. They were down by 16 to Purdue with 6 minutes left, kind of like Texas A&M was with Alabama. They just kind of lost the lead or lost the deficit down the stretch, and Penn State came back, whereas Texas A&M didn't. I know that's the number 1 Alabama team. But it was really surprising that Penn State did have a chance to tie it or even take the lead with about 3 seconds to go. They didn't because of a travel call, but that's that.
Yeah, it's interesting, looking at the Penn State team from afar, from my perspective, and then looking at the A&M team. A&M, I think preseason, if people were being realistic with themselves, were not picking this as a, top upper echelon of the SEC team. I think people thought, okay, they got some vets back. They looked good last year, but, we'll see what Buzz Williams could do. And I think when you look at what they did in the non-conference, they didn't really play a lot of great opponents. They went and played at Memphis and played a hard-fought game, lost by 4, but they came out of non-conference play going into SEC play at 8-5, and I don't think anybody kind of looked at them as a threat. And they get into the SEC and they just started winning, and every week they're winning and winning and winning, and that included wins at Auburn, which is a tough place to play. They beat Missouri, who got into the tournament. They beat them at home and away. They had big home games against Tennessee and Alabama. Alabama was late in the season at Reed Arena. And they only lost 3 regular season SEC games: at Kentucky, brutal place to play; at Arkansas, tough place to play; and at Mississippi State. So when you look at that, you say this is an A&M team that has really been battle tested. They've gotten some wins in some tough places, and then ran through the SEC tournament, like we said, losing to Bama in the SEC tournament championship. But this is the second straight year they've been able to do that. So this is I say they're a veteran-laden team. They have a couple of sophomores and juniors. But what you're going to find with this A&M team is it's a lot of their key players started elsewhere. One guy started at Duke, one guy started at Virginia Tech. They found their way to A&M, and this is a core that was very much together last year, that the core of it is all back. And so they went through all last season together, all this season together. And I think you got a dangerous bunch here. And so, I think this is going to be a really good game against Penn State. But, what do we always say when it comes tournament time? Veteran guard play is what helps win a lot of these early games in the tournament. And A&M has got that. So we're going to see what Buzz Williams' crew is, if they're up to the task. But, I'm a little bit more confident in A&M, coming out and finishing second in the SEC West. I'm higher on them right now than I am on Tennessee, Kentucky, Auburn, and Arkansas. All very talented teams, loaded with probably more 4- and 5-star talent than I think A&M has ultimately on the roster. But I trust the A&M bunch having to go on the road in neutral court and pick up tough wins. And so from that perspective, I think Penn State has a really, really tough battle on their hands.
Well, and that's what I mean. I like the matchup. I just wish we could have gotten it maybe in the Sweet 16 or something, where, because I projected, at least for me, I don't do a lot of bracketology, but when I look at a basketball team that wins the SEC regular season and then comes up short in the SEC title game against the number 1 overall team in Alabama, I see them as a 4 seed, at the very least a 5 seed. I was not expecting Texas A&M to somehow be a 7 seed, and that was the draw that Penn State was going to get. Because at first I was like, oh man, Texas A&M, that's a team I can see going to the Elite 8. But I sit back and I say, looking at the matchup itself, I mean, this is surprisingly enough, because everyone criticizes Penn State for rebounding. They don't have height. And Texas A&M, they're physical, they're athletic, but in the same case, they don't have their own version of a Zach Edey in this case, where someone who's 7 foot plus that's just going to rebound circles around Penn State.
Yeah, it's going to be fun to see. And by the way, Alabama won the regular season SEC. A&M finished, just behind them, 25-9 overall. But again, team with the second best record in the SEC. And they're a 7 seed. You're right. Somebody didn't like them for that to happen, but we'll talk about it as we go along, Zach. But you know what the committee was thinking? They're thinking Longhorns, Aggies in the second round. They want University of Texas against Texas A&M in that second round. I got a feeling that's why they dropped the Aggies all the way to a 7 seed. But as we continue on, breaking down this matchup with Zach Seiko, this is a Locked On crossover edition, talking about Texas A&M versus Penn State in the first round of
Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. The midway point of the NBA season is here, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no sweat first bet up to $1,000. That is right, $1,000. That's bonus bets back. If your first bet doesn't win, just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, super easy to use. Then you can bet everything that is your favorite in the NBA, the spread, money line, total, your player props, points, rebounds, assists, and so many exclusive bets like the 2x3, two three-pointers scored in the first 3 minutes. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a bigger payout with the same game parlay. So don't miss your chance to get that no sweat first bet up to $1,000 when you go to FanDuel.com/locked on. That is FanDuel.com/locked on. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA.
Continuing on here on our Locked On crossover edition. And Zach, as we get into this matchup, just talk a little bit about what Penn State does well offensively, defensively. What are some of the strengths of this team?
Well, there's not too many. At least they've been better defensively because according to Ken Pom or any of the analytical rankings, you look at Penn State and try to project their defense. They don't give up a lot of points, but in terms of defensive efficiency, they are one of the worst in the country. So Penn State's offense is what has gotten them here. Along with some other factors, of course, that for Penn State, it's shooting. The 3-point shooting has been key for them. Getting Andrew, you mentioned Texas A&M built from guys who were at different programs to start. Well, that's exactly what Penn State is this year, aside from a few other players and some freshmen. As far as the veterans go, the players that lead this team. Okay, Seth Lundy, Miles Dredd, those guys have been in the program for quite some time now. As far as the other key contributors, I think of Andrew Funk, who is that 3-point shooter that you're chasing all around the arc, trying to, make sure that he doesn't get a screen and gets wide open in the corner. He went to Bucknell. Then you have Cam Winter from Drexel. And then the best player on the team, just because he can all around do everything, he can dish it out, he can rebound it, he can score 40 if you need him to. And that's Jalen Pickett, who started at Siena. So at the end of the day, Penn State's like this Texas A&M team where they were built from scratch in some sort of sense this season. But ironically enough, for both the Aggies and the Nittany Lions, I think why they're in this position is because, yes, they were good players all along, but they needed to build chemistry. And that's very difficult to do at the beginning of the season. You're starting to find out, okay, what works best? Where can we put this guy? Okay, we figured out that he's not so much of a 2. We actually need him at a 3 just because it's the way that he sets up against competition. And that's what Penn State started to figure out. And I think ultimately Texas A&M as well, they just caught fire a little sooner earlier in SEC play. But I look back at that schedule for the Aggies and, see the losses to Memphis, Boise State, and that doesn't, I bet for the committee, they probably held that against them, but I honestly don't, because they probably had to work out some kinks because Penn State dealt with the exact same thing. The Nittany Lions lost to Virginia Tech once upon a time on a neutral court. And I think that Penn State would beat them. If they played each other 10 more times, I think Penn State would win 9 of them.
Yeah, it's interesting to see just, the composition of the rosters. And you talked a little bit about Penn State there. And I look at A&M and really the core of what they've had here all season long. It's really a trio. We talk Wade Taylor, who's a sophomore, second-year starter, Henry Coleman, a second-year starter, a junior who came from Duke, and then Tyrese Radford, who came from Virginia Tech, who has been with this program for a couple years now. And those 3 guys were kind of the core of the team a year ago, and they're the core of the team this year. And if you run through their box scores, you just see so many nights Wade Taylor is the leading scorer, either Taylor or Radford are your leading assist guys. And then, Henry Coleman a lot of times is your rebound leader, but the guy that's really come on as the season's come along, and I like him a lot, Dexter Dennis is a grad transfer from Wichita State. And we saw in the game against Alabama the other day, he was, the only guy really doing anything on offense. He finished with 14 points. But I kind of like how this team is composed. Like it's in contrast to Kentucky that, it's a lot of new guys, 4- and 5-star recruits all assembled together. And John Calipari's trying to find, all right, what are the right combinations? How do these guys gel? With A&M, you've got guys who are gelling and have played together, all last year and this year. And like I said, it's a veteran bunch, and they defend the rim well. Earlier in the year, they were winning a lot of games, scoring in the 70s and 80s. As you know, once you get deep into conference play, it gets tougher. Defenses are tougher. These teams a lot more because you see them so often. A&M had a lot of wins in the 60s in the last month. They found ways to gut out close wins, 69, 63, those type of battles. And I wouldn't call them elite defensively, but what they do give is great effort. And that's the hallmark of a Buzz Williams team. They're always going to be diving for loose balls, fighting for rebounds, getting physical, and all that kind of stuff. So, if I was a Penn State fan and hey, who do we need to worry about? I would say the big three of Wade Taylor, Henry Coleman, and Tyrese Radford.
Well, I'm actually really interested in just how they plan to use Dexter Dennis. And I know the trademark, you mentioned the trademark is the fact of effort when it comes to Buzz Williams teams. I always remember, growing up through the late 2000s and 2010s, the signature of Buzz Williams was the full court press nonstop at West Virginia, that from start to finish, you're getting man to man all up and down the floor. Is that the case with this Texas A&M team?
Yeah, you'll see that at times.
At
I was
times,
at
okay.
I was at Reed Arena earlier this year. I think it was early in SEC play. They hosted LSU, and it turns out LSU was just a really bad team this year.
Yeah.
They barely won any conference games. But yeah, LSU had a tough time with the press, and so Buzz Williams took advantage of it. He said, "Go stop them from bringing the ball up the court," and they really struggled with it. And you saw a lot of turnovers because of that. So. I think you're going to see some of that. One other guy I should mention too, Julius Marble, the several-year starter at Michigan State.
Yep.
He's one of their other big starters here, and again, a guy who doesn't necessarily pull down a ton of rebounds, but he does protect the rim well, and he is big and physical, and at times can put his back to the basket and go get points. I think only averaged about 9 points this year, but just another factor of a guy that you're going to have to worry about.
Yeah, I'm curious to see. I know that you mentioned Texas A&M is great at protecting the rim, even though they don't have a lot of big guys. I mean, they're physical in the fact that they can get to the free throw line. I know that, and they make their free throws too. There's a difference between, well, they draw fouls, but they're not really good at the stripe. Texas A&M is just that. Ironically enough, they don't really shoot as well from the field. They get inside the paint, they can make their layups just like any team can. But when it comes to threes, they're not all that great. How would you say they are at defending the three? Because that's Penn State this season. Live by the three ball, die by the three ball.
Yeah, I think they've done a pretty defending it. Shooting it, I'm trying to go back and remember. I don't think they've had a ton of games where they've shot a ton of threes. I know Wade Taylor has been a guy who's hit a bunch for him. Radford's hit some. But defending the three, yeah, I don't remember any team really going off against them this year, shooting a ton of threes. So yeah, we'll see. We'll see how they do against Penn State. Are you thinking maybe that might be a little bit of Penn State's MO, that they want to come out and flaming from deep?
I mean, that's just what they do. At one point in the season, they were number one at 3-point attempts. They were number one at 3 points made. They're still in the top 10 when it comes to that. Seth Lundy and Andrew Funk statistically are the best 3-point shooters in all of the country in terms of the analytics. Just the way that they're able to. The way that they're just able to fling it. So I'm curious to see, because Penn State has relax the pace a little bit. They're just a more offensively conscious team. They don't like to run up and down the floor, try to get as many possessions in the game as possible, because they're not like a Gonzaga. Everyone thinks that, well, they shoot a lot of threes, so they must go in transition quite a bit. From time to time they do. I've seen it where they almost set it up intentionally, where they'll do it they'll do it subtly. They'll come up the court, they'll push the pace just a little bit and try to get Andrew Funk on the wing and open him up in one of his more comfortable spots, which seems to be the right side. He likes the right side wing a lot. But they won't do that very often. They don't do a lot of in transition threes. They like to try to pass the ball around, do some inside outs, set a lot of screens to try to open some guys up, and then get more favorable matchups. And then Jalen Pickett and I don't know if you saw this coin phrase, Illinois in the press conference, because they were so upset that they lost to Penn State 3 times this season. They said, well, their one player, Jalen Pickett, likes to play booty ball, so we'll just give him that. And it's like, hey, you couldn't stop it. So I wonder how, because Jalen Pickett does use his body, use his frame. Penn State can be just as physical. They've moved essentially Miles Dredd, who is a 6'4" small forward, and played him at the 5 because he's a bigger body. I think he weighs 240, 250. So he's honestly like a defensive end in this case, and he doesn't move when other teams in the Big Ten with their 6'11", almost practically 7 foot, like a Hunter Dickinson, for example, And Miles Dredd has shown that he's been able to hold his own in those instances. So in terms of the I feel like Texas A&M is going to have a little more physicality that Penn State's been prepared for, but I got to imagine it's a little different in the SEC.
All right, moment of truth here in just a second. Zach and I will make our predictions for this one. All right, finishing up our Locked On crossover. Zach Seiko of Locked On Nittany Lions, Chris Gordy here of Locked On SEC. We're previewing 7-seed Texas A&M taking on 10-seed Penn State. Zach, I'll go first. I think, again, I'm buying into the stock of this Texas A&M team. I could be wrong. Look, a 10 over a 7 seed will get you a nice little early upset in your bracket.
Mm-hmm.
So not going to hate on anybody who takes Penn State, but I've just been a believer in this A&M team and what Buzz Williams has built on guys he's recruited and built around on top of the transfers that have all come in and played well. I'm picking Texas A&M in this one. I think a little bit lower scoring. I've got them winning 70-64 and A&M advancing. I got to think you're picking the Penn State Nittany Lions.
It's tough though, because like I said, I am a believer in Texas A&M as well, coming out of the non-conference play and just kind of keeping up, because I want progressively I've gotten, since Penn State's better, it's a lot more fun to look at all of college basketball rather than it's like, these teams are good and I hate that Penn State's not good. You don't have that problem this season anyway. So seeing that they were projected to be at the bottom of the SEC, and then you kind of blink, and then all of a sudden the Aggies were at the top of the conference. It was really surprising to me as well. So I just personally like the matchup for Penn State. If this was a team that couldn't handle the physical pressure, if this was a team that had a little more height, I think that Penn State would lose by double digits. But I like the way that they've had other players emerge for them. This used to be such a one-dimensional team in the fact that they only had 2 or 3 options on a given night. Now you're getting those 4th and 5th options involved, and Penn State can honestly go 9 guys deep in this kind of game where you feel confident with any combination of 5 they put on the floor. So I know that Texas A&M is one of them has to lose out. I know that some people have Penn State in the Sweet 16 and the Elite 8. Some people have Texas A&M in the Sweet 16 and Elite 8. I'm going to go Penn State here, and I say something along the lines of 66-64. I think Penn State shooting overall and Micah Shrewsbury's coaching will get the job done here. And since Texas A&M doesn't have one of those egregious advantages over Penn State, they seem pretty neutralized just with the things that Penn State struggles with. That's why I'm going with the Nittany Lions here.
And just to kind of look ahead, if we could, I teased it earlier, but a lot of people are, at least the committee, they're hoping for a Longhorn Aggie, round of 32 game with Texas and Texas A&M advancing. And look, Rodney Terry's done a fantastic job as the interim coach at Texas. They got some great players. Dylan Disu's been fun to watch all year long. But man, would it be fun to see the committee get spoiled and see the toothpaste Colgate upset Texas in round 1 and see Penn State beat A&M, and you get a Penn State Colgate matchup in round 2. Look, I think that's benefit Penn State. And so look, if you think this could happen, Penn State is going to the Sweet 16, and it's not that crazy to think of a scenario where that could happen. So just want to give the Nittany Lion fans out there a little hope of something that very well could happen this week.
Yeah, and I know Texas is coming off that big win against Kansas. I mean, it wasn't a 2-point win. It was a shellacking in the championship game, and something that I thought with Chris Beard, being fired and all the distractions, that this Texas team would fall off, and they never really did. So it's not an ideal matchup in the second round if Penn State, when I'll speak it into existence, when they make it to the second round.
And Zach, as we wrap up, obviously want to thank all of your listeners for making Locked On Nittany Lions their first listen every day. All of our listeners on Locked On SEC making us their first listen every day. But if anybody's looking for another listen, their second listen this week that they could make, go check out the Locked On College Basketball podcast. Isaac Shade and Andy Patton do a fantastic job talking all things college hoops. And so you definitely want to go check them out. If you're filling out your bracket, look, you got to do a second and third draft, right, before you finalize things. Go check out those guys with Locked On College Basketball, doing a great job, available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. Zach, it's been fun, man. Fun crossover, and go Nittany Lions and go Aggies, right?
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to a great game and for people to have the best brackets possible because I know that I've ripped up a couple. I finally got a champion right. It was Baylor 2 years ago, so I'm hoping more so that I can get a better bracket. But it's Nittany Lions are here for the first time in 12 years, so it feels pretty good over here up in State College.
Thanks to all of our listeners, and we'll be back on our own podcast tomorrow, right here on Locked On.
Thanks so much for checking out this episode of Locked On Nittany Lions. More to come, of course, with Penn State football getting a new hire in Deion Barnes as the defensive line coach, and spring ball is here. Spring practices have started, and the countdown to the blue and white game in the middle of April. Keep you up to date on all the news and analysis that comes out from those practices, and keep it right here for all of that and more on Locked On Nittany Lions.